Music is subjective, extremely subjective. A majority of popular music you hear on the daily is made with a level of accessibility in mind. Easy accessibility means appealing to the mainstream, therefore appealing to a much wider audience. Being more avant-garde and experimental means less accessibility, and therefore not a lot of people will necessarily connect to it or have the will to come back to it. Experimental music usually appeals to the people who actually listen and care about the music they listen to. But what if you make that experimental sound and texture fit within the lore, world, and narrative of a video game? You see, Battlefield 3 and 4's soundtracks were abrasive, loud, grimy, and rich with gritty and glossy synths, but not to the point where you would call it highly industrial or harsh. Battlefield 2042 on the other hand is not only abrasive, loud, grimy, and rich with synths, but 2042's soundtrack is borderline one of the harshest video game soundtracks out there, and because of that harshness, it's one of the most contentious soundtracks in the industry. But that harsh abrasiveness is wholly appropriate. The industrial synths and weird instruments heard throughout the soundtrack fit and even expand on the context of the world of Battlefield 2042. There's a storytelling element to the soundtrack, which honestly tells more story than the game's disconnected and disjointed implementation of random lore in the loading screens. Which begs the question, how does Battlefield 2042's soundtrack tell its story and build its world? Through the instruments and my personal interpretations of what the songs depict on the surface, I'll be looking at how the officially released soundtrack ties into the game's world and history. So your favorite songs from later seasons won't be included in this video, unfortunately. This is the theme of one of the game's maps titled Orbital. The map is located in Kourou of the French Guiana and has the Americans going against the Russians during the War of 2042. They fight in an orbital rocket station where the Russians must prevent a rocket launch by the Americans, or risk having the Americans send new hardware into space that'll only benefit them in the war. The song itself sounds like a prologue to the War of 2042, and in a way, the events happening here on Orbital is the result of a long conflict building up and only now reaching its climax. The Orbital station was abandoned in 2036, 6 years prior to the game, and the Americans moved in on the site in 2041 to take advantage of the launch site. So the song's suspenseful but hard-hitting feel makes sense within the context of what's actually going on. The song's overall production sounds grand, but there's also a subtle feel of spaciousness within the occasional noise of the song. The song isn't quite intense compared to other songs on the soundtrack, even with these screeching industrial sounds heard later. It's the hard pound before the great event. The way the song creates suspense feels kind of surreal. The subtle but very present tension it creates has a sense of uncertainty. That uncertainty feels appropriate to how the map itself plays out. There's a stake, being the rocket that is about to launch. The amount of damage that has to be done to that rocket makes you feel as if you might not succeed in preventing the rocket launch in time, as the clock ticks and keeps on ticking, and the song only heightens that uncertainty and tension. Life, nature, even humanity is beginning to fade. Things are going to hell. And this is the last time to admire the scenery, the last time to digest the sights of earthly life that's still left, because it isn't staying anytime soon. The observation of beautiful forms is a melancholic track, while still implementing the industrial elements that the soundtrack will be filled with. It's the soundtrack to a horrific transition. It's beautiful yet eerie. Natural resources and infrastructure are evaporating and crumbling. Life forms of certain kinds are also going up in the horrific chaos. The mix of beautiful melodies created by the harsh industrial synths could also refer to the damage that people are doing to nature by using technologies to sabotage it, rebuilding what has been lost but creating heavily urbanized and man-made lands. The vocals and ambience heard throughout makes this feel like the most human, soulful, and the liveliest song of the soundtrack. It's beautiful. And it'll be the last truly beautiful thing about the soundtrack, because sonically and thematically, it only goes down from here as we dig deep into the War of 2042. Irreversible, an appropriate title for a follow-up to the previous song. The world has had its time to admire the beautiful forms of life, and now it's mostly gone. The damage is done and there's no going back. The only life form kicking and screaming are humans, but with the way human conflict works, it won't be too long until they're gone too. Irreversible is also the code name for the map Breakaway, which is located in Queen Maud land of Antarctica. Breakaway takes place in an industrial area with an oil rig trapped in ice and other factorial structures laid around the map and on the outskirts. The place has a history of oil drilling and hunting for fossil fuels. The Russians dominate the region in terms of oil supplies. All this industrialization and factorial factors translate into the map's theme. The song is filled with heavy use of industrial synths. The rumbling synths could also emulate this map's history of drilling. The medium pace of the song also feels appropriate to the fact that the notepads use this place as a quick resting area in between deployments, catching a breather in the middle of the war. It isn't quite calm, but it's far from chaotic. The slight whistling sounds heard in the middle of the song could also be depicting the fact that the technology during this oil drilling operation ran on fumes. The use of scraps and backup parts were used to repair this technology. The song sounds like a valid culmination of the map's history and its downfall. Its history is pulled to the forefront of the song. It's like listening to an anthem made from the sounds of the workplace within this oil rig and the operation. I don't have too much to say about Between the Bows other than it feels like a long and loud interlude, and a bit of a nostalgic one at that. Sonically, it sounds like a combination of Battlefield 3, 4, and 2042's musical style. The occasionally glossy synth of Battlefield 3, some of the dirty and mildly industrial elements and thumping beats of Battlefield 4, as well as the abrasive synths and screeches of 2042. It's a good song, but within the context of the larger story, there isn't too much meat on the bone. It essentially depicts the downtime between the battles, restocking and making the most of the R&R, and for that, it does a good job, especially after what I mentioned about Breakaway being a quick resting place for the notepads between deployments. Have you ever heard of industrial jazz? I thought not. I listen to all kinds of weird, experimental and avant-garde music, yet I've never even thought of this combination. War jazz is Hilda Gunnardóttir doing what she does best, creating off-kilter and depressing atmospheres and sounds. The title and the state of 2042's world always made me imagine a group of former jazz bands and artists coming together with scraps they found and making the most of them to pull off a show within the map of Stranded, using rusty and stripped down parts to make music as a recreational activity. It's one of the most unique things I've heard. There's something disturbing, grim, and depressing about the song, yet it still strangely sounds immaculate. The stickiness of the strings, duct tape, or whatever it is I'm hearing at the beginning, the rough and eerie notes of the synths that emulate an airy sound, and the sheer minimalism. It all makes a lot of sense, and it all comes together extremely well, and it all feels very authentic and haunting. Narratively, I can't quite put my finger on what the song is possibly supposed to depict in the world of 2042, but it definitely sounds like it could be the world slowly crumbling in agony, that's for sure. In a way, Load Bearing sounds like a continuation of war jazz. That simplicity and minimalism of war jazz continues here, or with a weightier sonic. While that song felt like making music as a sort of recreational activity, Load Bearing feels like making music to send a message. It's war jazz but with a slightly orchestral and tragic scope. It's eerie and suspenseful. This is easily one of the more terrifying Battlefield songs I've heard. It's a song that feels low-key but epic at the same time. Uncertain. Within the context of the story, the song is definitely about the cargo and shipping chains and operations during the War of 2042. The bad weather of the sea within the trade routes, which we'll come back to, as well as the trafficking of imports and exports via Singapore. Singapore is the place for everything cargo and relaxation, and the soundtrack makes sure to depict that. The song manages to feel calm, depicting the relaxation that Singapore contains, and unsettling, which depicts the intense sea weather that is being held back by the big seawall that was built to fight back against the high waters. While some of the no-pats were chilling in Singapore, there was always a worry that the seawall wouldn't hold. So the song creates a sense of paranoia and anxiety over its chill bass instrument that continues throughout the whole song, with occasional tense synths, dark ambience, and hard-pounding beats coming in to interfere. And that loud interference in the song works within the context of the story, where the Russians attack the Singaporean ports out of nowhere after pulling their trade interests, where the US forces must assist Singapore and prevent shipping routes around the globe from falling into enemy hands. When does a country stop being a country? Dissolution, lack of a population, lack of resources, lack of borders, lack of government or politics, all the above maybe? The song hints at a possible answer. It's sonically spacious, minimal, hollow, and empty. There's very few defining sounds, meaning there's not a lot to this place left to define it as a country. There's no government, there's no political law, some of the borders are gone. This is no longer a country. This is just a scarily large piece of land that is now a war zone. Battlefield really does ask the real questions. The song itself answers its own question perfectly. It sounds large but empty. It's chilling, which is perfect for depicting the realization of the answer and the current situation the world of 2042 is in. But yet, the song's high-noted synths and the overall pace of the song sounds somewhat comforting, and there's a sense of hope and faith, especially as it builds up in the end, highlighting that there's still some beauty left in the world despite its decay. This is easily my favorite song of the official soundtrack. It's intense, climactic, insanely abrasive, and grimy as all hell. The title 5 Degrees of Warming highlights an important aspect of 2042's world. Its highly unstable weather and unsettling atmosphere. Sonically, this is one of the only songs that really feels like it depicts the nature-based antagonist of 2042 with pride. This song is the sound of global warming in full force. This is the sound of scientific and geographic nightmares. Global warming is no joke, and this song takes it seriously. The title comes from the theory and speculation that the world could warm up by 5 degrees Celsius, and if it does, sea levels will rise. Harvest and agriculture would be greatly affected, as well as humans who will die in various ways. It could also refer to 5-degree burns, I don't know. Most life forms, including us, would burn to death and the world would become sterile. The climate would change and the earth would begin its suicidal session. It's a nightmarish event that could and probably would happen at some point. After everything that has happened with countless pollution and now the lack of basic resources that the earth needs to stay balanced, the weather and overall climate of 2042's world is almost beyond messed up, and the consequences are soon to be shown. The combination of warm, moist air could also play a part in the formation of tornadoes. In fact, by 2040 within the story, there's already a Kessler effect occurring due to a space debris storm. Sonically, the industrial synths that seem to make the song very contentious are interpreted as intense weather. The higher pitched synths that build up to the hard hitting moments of the song could be the setup of these weathers, or more tragically, the radiation of the heat. When it all comes together, unironically, everything is burning to shit. If climate warfare was a thing, this would be the theme song. It sounds like the weather and the earth being at odds and affecting the ongoing wars. And if you've played 2042, the weather is used to your advantage to win these different battles. So yeah, climate warfare. I like to think of this song as the anthem of the notepads. This is their war cry, going in with absolutely no fear, not intimidated by anything in their way, charging into the battlefield with pride, eager to fight for what they stand for. Fighting for survival and getting the resources they can. According to the title, this seems to be the fight for coal. Jeez, humans just really want to see the world burn, huh? First oil, now coal? The raging flame just never seems to burn out, even within the cold landscape of Kuru. Wet Bulb is a very difficult song to analyze because I have no idea what it is proposing or trying to depict within the grander story. A battle in the rain under a dark sky? Or perhaps ships during a stormy night lighting the path forward? Maybe. I have to say the production on the song is one of the most satisfying solely because of its cheeky sounding triangle sound. The occasional bling that pops up throughout the dark ambience and grimy synths. It's a nice sounding song, but there's not that much to it other than it sounds like another haunting and eerie track off the soundtrack that would fit the Assassin's Creed movie perfectly. As for the title Wet Bulb, I've really got no idea. Hourglass is basically the main map of 2042, as it's mentioned and shown a lot in official promotions for the game, including the lore. Located in Doha of Qatar, the city is drenched with sand. Climate change has not been well to this place, as it is the cause of the extreme desertification of such a beautiful city. It's a place of sandstorms and forever fading beauty. In fact, it has one of the biggest storms in the game. When the sandstorm hits, it rises, and it creates a completely different atmosphere for the city. Debris and material just flying everywhere within the thickest, warm, sandy air. It's an hourglass. The sand will fall and rise with time. Then everything that was built will be nothing but an illusion, a desert mirage. And in an appropriate fashion, the song sounds like a hopeless race against time. There's a long suspense, but even the suspense doesn't feel too urgent. There's nothing that can be done about the loss of a beautiful city. It's just a matter of time before the city is swept away, and all we can do is watch, like keeping an eye on the hourglass. Even when the beat comes in, it isn't as hard-hitting, intense, or action-packed as the other intense songs on the soundtrack. It's unsettling, but fate has already been accepted, and this song depicts it very well. Shipping Forecast is another long interlude. It's mellow for the majority of its runtime. It's a very quiet song until the near end, where there's a little bit of a Battlefield 3 vibe going on with the instrumentation. Kinda sounds like a remix of Kafarov's Villa of the Battlefield 3 soundtrack. We also come back to a point that I laid out when covering load bearing: shipping cargo. Shipping is a whole new dangerous task with how the seas are growing stronger and deadlier with the rising waters and violent storms. These storms have destroyed many cargo ships and moved throughout the region to some shores and harbors, resulting in the map Stranded, where a vessel lay stranded as a result of a suspected Russian attack. The song depicts the literal calm before the literal storm, within the middle of the ocean during a shipping process. This song reminds me of the scene in the Exodus short film where Irish is in the workplace and realizes that Pac was right about what he said earlier to him, and that Oz was coming for them. If you haven't watched the Exodus short film for 2042, and you enjoy the Battlefield 4 campaign to whatever extent, check it out, it's great. Tipping Points sounds like a direct sequel to Load Bearing, with its reuse of the airy instruments and the melody of that instrument. But like Shipping Forecast before, it is a mellow song, albeit with a bit more urgency. with spacious, hard-hitting beats that are far in between and free-flowing synths. The song gives off an eerie aftermath vibe. It could fit in one of those scenes in a war movie where after a large explosive or disaster, someone checks around and says, "It's quiet, too quiet." It sounds like the end of the war, but we all know it's far from over. We all know that the different variations and reinterpretations of the Battlefield main theme don't disappoint, and 2042's rendition of the theme is no exception. For some. This is easily my third favorite rendition of the Battlefield main theme, alongside the stutter version of Battlefield 4's theme and Battlefield 3's main theme. 2042's theme is loud, hard-hitting, bombastic, and borderline abrasive. The screeches and squeals, the distortion, the bass, the synths, everything. It comes together beautifully, and is by far the most experimental and most contentious version of the iconic theme yet. It sounds off-kilter and harsh on the ears, but it's raw, super grimy, and violent. This is the theme of a grounded futuristic war, and to me, it doesn't disappoint in the slightest. This song is essentially a culmination of the entire narrative, an ambitious and tragic story that is still ongoing, and that we might even face in the fairly far future. The soundtrack of 2042 tells its story solely through its instrumentation. It's more than just setting the mood. It generally sounds like anthems that would be made in this crumbling world that 2042 places us in. Using electronic-based production and heavily synthesized emulations of instruments that have been far stripped of their true abilities and beauty. The sounds presented in the soundtrack show us the state of 2042's world and what is left of it. Through glossy synths, the imagery of the more stable parts of the game's world are depicted, with flourishing trade, technically advanced infrastructure, and advanced warfare. The grittier and harsher sounds depict the chaos that ensues and the resources that have been lost, making use of scraps and discovering abandoned or damaged locales. It's a real shame that 2042 doesn't have a campaign, because the story and themes here are promising and ambitious, and with the proper writers, this could have been the best Battlefield story told alongside Battlefield 3. The world building is there, the foundation is laid out, but no one is willing to take the leap of faith. Maybe the next game. Is Battlefield 2042's soundtrack perfect? Not in the slightest. I love the soundtrack and the direction it was going for, but there were some things that could have been fleshed out a bit more. I wish the soundtrack had themes for people and the factions within the world of 2042, just like it has themes for the maps. But from what we got, Hilda Gunnarsdottir, who also composed the soundtrack for Joker and Chernobyl, as well as Sam Slater, did a very good job carrying the narrative and atmospheric weight within the music of 2042. Everything I said is my personal interpretation of the different narrative things the soundtrack represents. And if you think I'm reading too much into it, well, that's what I do best. I know there's additional music for 2042 that I haven't talked about, but I wanted to focus on the officially released soundtrack, and now I feel my job is done. And by the way, the Battlefield 4 video is on the way. We're going back in time a little bit. Be prepared. What's up, ACJC here, and it's been a minute and I've been very busy with school amongst other things. I've got a lot of videos on the way and a lot of plans have changed, and I just feel dead recording this. The follow-up episode to my previous video is still in the works, but due to that video's reception, I put it on the sidelines, which was to be expected. Like I've mentioned, I'm working on the Battlefield 4 video as well as 2 other videos that I'm actually really excited about. One of them will most likely come out just before the Battlefield 4 video. I know compared to the previous years that this is definitely the least content I've ever produced within a year for YouTube, and I mean, this is the 5th video this year and it's already almost the next year, which is crazy. But life catches up to you and it happens. You guys might have noticed that I've labeled the older videos on the channel as demos and concepts. That's because as I've grown older and learned a lot more about what goes into crafting content, I've seen those videos and all my public work differently. Those videos are essentially proof of concepts. I realized I was trying to lay the groundwork of what was to come for this channel, and that Just Cause 3 video, which is still my most viewed video on the channel, was the realization and culmination, I'm so tired, of what I was laying out with everything before, and I thank you guys tremendously for that. This channel is definitely more important to my life than I initially thought. I've learned about what goes into art and entertainment. I've learned how to self-reflect and look back in a proper way. I've noticed this while I was making the infamous remake video, but I fully see it now. Obviously I'm still young and there's still a lot to learn, but now I'm at the age where I feel like I truly know what I'm doing. I started doing YouTube back when I was 11 in 5th grade. I was also down to experiment and find my place. I've tried vlogs, I've tried music, which I'm still doing now, and I've actually recently found my footing in music now. And I've tried streaming and I've tried let's plays, you know, but writing and editing is where I feel at home. Writing for videos, music, and soon to be films is definitely something I want to do. Thank you guys for teaching me and being alongside me on this journey. I know I sound like I'm rambling. I am. My mind is like drifting off. I haven't slept yet, and it's nearly like 5 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, this channel's essentially laying the groundwork for my future in entertainment and arts, and I realized this on my cinematography and video games video, where the cinematographer for Ghost of Tsushima thanked me for praising his work, which is still some of the best in the industry today. I've come into contact with many different people working within this industry or just across different mediums, such as a fan novel that I've been writing since February of this year and published in early September, where one of the designers on the game were looking forward to reading it. But you know, again, thank you guys for following me on this platform and foundation I've been building. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay entertained, take care, and take it easy. I'm going to bed. I'm tired as hell. I didn't even know what I just said. Cheers.
History will remember this, Irish.
And so will I.
Only one way to stop this war. And that's to get in the middle of it. Put a call out to any notepad who will listen.
36 hours to door. Get ready to fight!